Welcome to day one of the PSU Cleantech Challenge. It is 2021, and now more than ever, we need to take action to drastically reduce the impact on our environment. The current health crisis has demonstrated that we need to implement more sustainable practices to preserve our world for future generations. Over the next 4 days, we will look at some bold new thinking about sustainable ideas, looking at the future of healthcare, transportation, education, and how PSU students are developing clean tech solutions that solve tangible problems in our community and the world. On the fourth and final date, you will have the opportunity to engage directly with our student teams. Just check your email for the links. Let's get the work started right now by digging into how technology can help make our healthcare system more environmentally friendly. Travis Woodland, PSU Director of Innovation and Intellectual Property, will guide us in that conversation.
Well, thank you, Juan, and welcome everyone. I'm glad you could make it. My name is Travis Woodland, and I am the Director of our Innovation and Intellectual Property Department at RGS. I have with us today Anna Brown, who is the founder and CEO of Stark Street Materials Corporation, which is a relatively young startup company, around 2 years old, maybe a little more. And it was founded on some technology that she actually helped create when she was a graduate student in Portland State University. Welcome, Anna.
All right, thanks, Travis. So as you mentioned, I was a graduate student at Portland State, and we kind of invented a material, and it was a little bit of we needed an X-ray opaque ink one day, and so I made up some ink and thought this would be a phenomenal product. So we pitched it to PSU, and PSU said, absolutely, we should try and patent protect this. And then it went through a screening by some master's students and business students for whether it had any market viability. And they said, yes, absolutely, although we pivoted a little bit on the application at that point. So when I graduated, we started a company, we went through it, that particular market fell through. And at that point, I wasn't really ready to go full on into entrepreneurship. So I went and did a postdoc in pharmacy. And so I give you a little bit of this background because I really have worked in a lot of different areas, weirdly on very similar projects and materials. But my PhD is in chemistry. My postdoc was in pharmacy, but I have a lot of experience in biology and biological testing things. So after that was done, I decided I really was ready to get back into the entrepreneurship game, and this technology had been patented. The patent had been issued at this point to PSU. So I decided to start a company, and now we make radiation shielding materials. So the technology is basically a way to block radiation that doesn't use lead. So lead has historically been one of the best elements for shielding radiation. It's very abundant, it's very cheap, it's easy to work with. Obviously, it's very toxic. And that's sort of in the past couple of generations come to light, and we've tried to find really interesting ways to pivot away from lead just because of that toxicity. So what we're using is the element bismuth, which is down on the periodic table next to lead. It's very non-toxic, fairly ecologically benign, and it's got some very different physical properties to lead, but one that it's fantastic at is blocking radiation. So I joke that we're the bismuth business, and I am a bismuth entrepreneur. And so we're building radiation shielding material with bismuth.
So I don't think anyone needs convincing that lead is a toxic material that we should try to use less of whenever possible. And it sounds like if, with an equivalent amount of radiation shielding, there's definitely an environmental angle to this. Do you have any ideas about how much the medical industry and its use of lead for this purpose, how much that actually impacts the environment today, with waste or any other kind of lead getting into the environment, and is there a really strong case that if there was a switch over at least in part, and maybe someday wholesale, to this kind of material, that it would have a huge environmental impact?
You know, I don't have a great understanding of really the long-term ecological impact of replacing lead in medical facilities. And this is in part because when you start talking about lead in medicine or radiation in medicine, is that everybody gets a little concerned about the legal issues. So when we were doing a lot of the market research for this and customer discovery, people were very hesitant to talk to me. I was accused at one point of being a newspaper reporter or from regulatory agencies. So looking at it, having hospitals and infrastructure and materials and garments specifically with kind of a lot of lead in them, yes, I would say that this is not great, certainly from an environmental impact. And in many cases, to dispose of the like lead aprons you might wear in a dentist's office or get used in a hospital for an X-ray, the if you're disposing of them, you actually have to pay to dispose them because they are hazardous waste, right? It's literally full of lead dust. Could see a business case for replacing them from the sense that you're reducing any sort of liability related to lead exposure. But I think the environmental case is very straightforward and very logical and very intuitive. It's just not entirely clear that anybody's going to make it unless there is regulatory push or a financial push. So somebody pointed out at one point that all of the X-ray imaging facilities anywhere by law have to have lead-lined walls, which is, that's great for shielding radiation, but it's not particularly great for a fireman that has to go in and put out a burning building. But who changes that regulation, or why would that get changed is sort of an open-ended question that I hope at some point we sit down and as a society really decide that we want to go with the non-toxic, more environmentally friendly materials that are less likely to be catastrophic if they catch on fire. But that's getting anything pushed through legislation is sounds like a challenge, big uphill battle.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that causing wholesale change through legislation or regulation is often really difficult. And the medical industry, in some ways, can be even more difficult because of the various types of risk assessments that invariably happen. I've seen some prototypes of your product before, and one of the more compelling things I've always thought is not only that it's likely much more environmentally friendly, but it's a lot lighter and more comfortable and flexible. So not only is there an environmental angle to this, but there's also a potential real human impact, which sometimes carries the day. And sadly the environment sort of gets second seating in terms of what people are really after. But you want to talk a little bit about how your material can really help the folks that are providing those healthcare services as well.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, and it's a challenge, I would say, as a scientist turned entrepreneur that I've sort of struggled with, which is why you're making something or why you're doing something, and what is the end goal. In science, the end goal is to understand things, to describe things, and to really have a grasp on how the world works. As an entrepreneur and building a business, my goal has to be, by sheer definition, to make money, because if I don't make money, the company doesn't exist. So having a green focus is, I would say, a personal choice that I've really grabbed onto, just because that's it. I don't really want to build a business that it isn't green and it doesn't somehow make the world better. This material, as far as how it's going to be useful for a consumer, and by consumer, sorry, I'm getting way deep into starting to think like an entrepreneur too much these days. So the user, the healthcare worker who would wear these things, it is going to be lighter. It's going to be more comfortable. I honestly have a list of like 5 or 6 things that it's just going to flat out be better than what's currently used for radiation shielding. The big one, and possibly the one that's most interesting to hospitals as far as process changing, is that it's going to be sterilizable. So right now, those lead aprons, the radiation shielding garments that you use, they're very, very difficult to clean. They're almost impossible to fully sterilize. They are own garments. They're pieces of fabric that are stitched together, and those are notoriously difficult to clean if you can't stick them in a laundry or in a solution. So the ones we're developing, you'll be able to stick a bucket of bleach or a bucket of alcohol, and some of them even to autoclave. And so we're really hoping that will help the cleanliness and the sterility of these garments that get used repeatedly, many, many times in a hospital setting. But will also be more comfortable, right? They'll be able to shape to your body. They'll be elastic. That's a really big one, because right now the lead aprons people wear aren't, they're just sort of heavy and they just sort of drape, but the ones we're making will be elastic and strong, and so you can envision even like a glove made out of it that you could use your fingers, and it would be nice to use.
Well, I think probably everyone has had one of those lead garments on them at one point, even if it's just at the dentist's office, or to get an X-ray. And I don't think few people would describe them as comfortable. But the fact that they don't get cleaned very often, or at least not sterilized, is sort of the icing on the cake, right? If you're a patient.
I'm sorry to have to tell you that. Nobody likes hearing that.
Yeah. So I mean, given everyone's recent attention to increased hygiene and hospital and personal cleanliness related to COVID and really just general new awareness, it sounds like you're ticking a lot of boxes in the pro column. For this technology, it sounds like you've been really listening to what the market wants and trying to figure out how to sell this for lack of a better term from various angles, so that you can you can make sure that everyone who would otherwise find some issue with your product, you have an argument against that. What was how did you get to that point? Because you're a scientist by training, and a lot of those skills don't naturally come to most scientists and engineers. So what was your process for learning this skill set and having this realization that you can be a scientist and be an entrepreneur at the same time?
It was a massive shift, as I said, as I alluded to, the shifting what your focus and what your end goal is. That one's very hard. I remember when I was a grad student, I went and sat in on an angel investing group, and I was shocked because I thought we were going to go do the entrepreneur thing and have a startup, because we wanted to build jobs and we wanted to build companies, and we were going to grow the economy and all that. And these angel investors were very, very clear that this was about making money, and that was it. And that really kind of threw me for a loop. But the truth is that's sort of what capitalism is, and so all the good parts of capitalism include the world these days, but some of the darker sides are darker, and just sort of understanding what the parameters of that system are, even from a scientific perspective, have really helped me wrap my head around what it is we're doing, why, and then how do you do it. So I wouldn't say that I've approached it as a game, but thinking of it really as a system, that this is how it works, and this is what you have to do to get here, and just keeping your, to quote a cliche, eyes on the prize, or keeping the big picture has really helpful. And as far as talking about green energy, or clean energy, clean technologies, all that stuff, they're only really ever going to come about if an entrepreneur or a system really decides that they are a priority. But the real way it works in the world is capitalism. So they're only ever going to exist if they can make money, or if it's more financially advantageous to do it in a certain way. So, finding entrepreneurs that are green focused, are environmentally focused, but do understand that capitalism is how we work. That is the system we have agreed upon, and that's the game you have to play.
Yeah, it's as someone who works with folks like yourself and has for many years, sometimes it's a hard lesson, and sometimes it's just a lesson for the scientist who wants to do something just because it's better, because they believe in a new idea, or in doing something that's more environmentally friendly, whatever their motivations are. But that extra layer of capitalism, the economic reality, um, sometimes takes a little effort to really make those both work together. Um,
Yeah.
you
So
mentioned that.
I would say the important lesson, the biggest lesson for me was I wrote a lot of really, really phenomenal grant proposals when I was an academic scientist that didn't get funded. And, I started thinking about it, and I realized that if I can't convey the research ideas in a way that gets the money, I can't do the research. And that's kind of how the world works, that it's the money between you and doing what you want to do, regardless of how well you believe in it. And that's, yeah, as I mentioned, it's a hard lesson, but that is how the world works.
Yeah, well, even in pure science, the folks that can tell a story, that can show a vision of some kind, and show an economic benefit to society, I think it's fair to say they tend to do better, long term with grant proposals, because that is something that they're looking for. Um, so, I think many of the folks that are going to be watching this, are going to be students, who are thinking about, you know, what would my entrepreneurial journey look like? How does that relate to, being a student and graduating? So can you, I know you mentioned this earlier, but can you expand on sort of your journey from student to entrepreneur, and you maybe talk about some of the resources that PSU, had, or the just general, Portland Metro entrepreneurial community has had to help you on your way. Very few people are able to do this on their own.
Yeah. Well, when I was a grad student, my plan had been to go do a postdoc and possibly apply for some faculty positions, or work in a lab doing. I couldn't imagine doing anything other than bench work for the rest of my career, because I just love it. And then, as I mentioned, these students that were part of a master's business class, and they did a commercial evaluation on this technology. They, at the end of it, said, yes, we think there's a market for this. We want to start a company. And it was really, I really distinctly remember that weekend where my mind was going 10 miles an hour, or 10, it's going 100 miles an hour, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to go into a startup. I'm going to be the CTO of a startup company. Somebody wants to commercialize this technology. And it was like the light bulb flicked on. And I think most entrepreneurs will tell you this, that they had their light bulb moment, that you get bitten by the bug and you are infected. And that is kind of that. So the funding for Stark Street Material has been kind of an interesting journey. It's been from a lot of different places. We started out with the Portland University Venture Development Fund, and Portland State has been incredibly helpful and supportive, both emotionally and financially, in getting this technology patented, getting the company developed. We currently have a lab at the Portland Accelerator, and extremely useful for, just having a physical space to put things, and mentally really to go to work. Business Oregon has also been very generous with us, to get some of these prototypes and to get the projects up and going. And I also went through the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps program as well. That was great for sort of refining a market, learning a couple of skills related to customer discovery, figuring out what we were making and why. And then I joined the Clean Tech Alliance and went through the Cascadia Clean Tech Accelerator. And that was very, very helpful in particular to think about what is clean tech, and what are the overall implications of running a clean tech company, and how to make things greener in a sense, but also not how to not greenwash things, right? I don't pretend like we're going to save the world. We're going to really just make the world a bit better. So we then have been funded by the National Science Foundation with an SBIR, and currently working on a small project with the Cascadia Clean Tech Alliance in conjunction with PSU to prototype some of these materials. So, Oregon's been a great place to really develop this. People are incredibly nice. Everybody's happy to talk with you, to work with you, and is very encouraging of green tech, because I think Oregon really understands the value of building a business, working in an economy, but also keeping in mind that the companies should make the world better and not worse. I would say one skill that I've had to really actively develop in myself to be an entrepreneur, how to go talk to people and how to cold talk to people, or how to track somebody down on the street and figure out how to say something to them that doesn't freak them out and make them want to walk away, or how to get what information I want out of it, and how to be comfortable doing that. So to be an entrepreneur, you really, really have to talk to a lot of people. There's no getting around it. So figuring out who to talk to and how to get information and how to move forward with that is that would be my advice, is work on that as a skill.
Yeah, well, as someone who's an iCore fanboy, I've been a cheerleader for iCore for quite some time. I probably even suggested it to you at one point, so I'm glad you did it. But finding that team of people and forcing yourself to get more comfortable with that cold calling and trying to figure out how to chat with folks that you don't know and then try to connect with them in a meaningful way. There's probably no more important skill you can get out of that type of learning environment.
Yeah,
and you've definitely grown a lot
story.
since I first met you, in terms of being very personable and able to tell your story, and so I can see the skill set for sure.
Yeah, I was going to tell you a funny story about iCore with my graduate advisor, Andrea Goforth, who was doing this with me. We were in Philadelphia at UPenn, and we were in the medical hospital there, and I was literally at that point walking into medical facilities, finding the radiation department and talking to anybody about how they used radiation aprons, and just trying to learn the flow through. And so I told her where I was going, and I said, would you like to come along? And she followed me about halfway there, and then we got into the room, and I just sort of walked up and started trying to talk to her, and she got so uncomfortable and turned around and walked away. And I think, that was me 2 months ago, but now this is just what I do. I just happen to be in Philadelphia, and I'm going to go hassle somebody about how they use lead aprons, and that's that. And it's a weird skill. It's weird to watch yourself do that sometimes, but I'm glad I was sort of forced to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably fair to say that in general, research scientists, academics, tend to be less likely to have that skill set, to be more introverted, less likely to just reach out to someone that they don't know. And I've seen, not only in you but in others, that it not only makes them a better entrepreneur, but in the long run it makes them a better scientist, because they are better at communicating. They're not afraid to reach out and get information from someone. or talk about their work, and you never know where that kind of conversation is going to lead in terms of a new opportunity. And so I think I hope it's been very valuable for you. Um, so
Absolutely.
we've um, what do you think is next for Stark Street? I mean, you said you have an SBIR, so that
Mhm.
sounds like prototyping and testing. What do you think the next, year or so looks like in terms of, when we have the next interview? We're going to talk about all the great new accomplishments. What's on the horizon?
What's on the horizon? Well, I've just hired a new CTO, Simon, who is fantastic. He's a physicist, and I didn't quite realize how much having someone who's good at running these calculations and keeping things organized, and um, really getting the lab and tech side of things well put together is going to be incredibly helpful. But right now, Simon and I spend our days in the lab milling bismuth and doing bismuth chemistry and working with plastics and um, feeling plastics and figuring out how to test all this stuff. And it's sort of it's a material science dream. I suspect it will be over soon once we have a really good working prototype. And then we'll dive back into the business side and prototyping. But we're still sorting out exactly what our business model is going to look like. We know that we're going to make the particles, and we know that we're going to make the radiation shielding materials, but how those actually end up in the hands of a, a user, so someone who works in medicine. So this is a doctor, a nurse, or a hospital or a dental clinic, isn't quite yet. So whether we use a distributor or whether we distribute directly, or develop our business as a direct to consumer company is not entirely clear yet. But in the next year, I hope that we have good working prototypes of 2 to 3 different products, and that we're starting to look at mass manufacturing of these materials. I'd really like to pick one particular market that we go after really aggressively and produce a product for it, but also design an entire company or an entire process around the entire life cycle of that garment. So as I mentioned, the lead aprons that people dispose of, they actually have to pay to dispose of them because they are hazardous waste. I would very much like to design into these products either a buyback program where we can collect and recycle the material, or a repair program. So one of the products we're developing, in theory, can be repaired if it ever breaks, cracks, tears, or somehow is letting radiation through. And then, keeping that sort of whole ecosystem of the product looped in and together. But between then and now, there's a lot of testing, some process engineering, and a whole lot of learning about how materials manufacturing grows and evolves. So we're getting almost literally knee deep in industrial manufacturing.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a lot of work, but it also sounds like a lot of fun. Getting at least a little bit more time, back on the lab bench before you've got to figure out how to be a supply chain, engineer and get everything growing. Well, I for one certainly hope that at some point in the future there's a non-lead apron or vest at the dentist, or the next time I need an X-ray, and hopefully some happier nurses and technicians that don't have to wear heavy lead garments all day long while they do their work. Um, it's interesting to hear you talk about the life cycle. I mean, that seems to be a trend in a lot of places, everything from, Nespresso capsules in the US to appliances, over in Europe. There's a lot of new talk, and in some cases, real regulation around, having the manufacturers take responsibility for the end of life of their products. And so it's great to see that our homegrown entrepreneurs, might be thinking of, how to be the vanguard on that rather than reactive to new legislation.
Well, I'm really at the older end of the generation that's going to really revolutionize the world, hopefully, and manufacturing as well. That we've grown up, and my entire life, garbage has been an issue, and really in the past decade or so, some of those images of just mountains and mountains and mountains of garbage, or floating islands in the ocean of garbage, those are pretty terrifying, and that's a pretty terrifying thing to think about. And then even when you sort of wrap your head around what global warming means, it's even more just sort of terrifying. And unfortunately, terror is a phenomenal motivator. So there's really, when you think about it, it's really easy to sort of freak out and shut down, that there's nothing you can do, right? I can't go out and start yelling at people about littering or producing waste, or having an unnecessary plastic cup, and even feeling guilty every time I take one. Or I did a lot of traveling recently, and was calculating some of my carbon footprint, or all the plastic waste that went into providing me some food at the airport is pretty terrifying. And it it really made me want to do something to change the world, made me want to do something to make the world better. And I can only imagine how it's impacting younger people. So even if that's just coming about, and that's just a motivator for the next generation, is I think that's something that's really going to be big in the future, and I think we're going to be talking about this for a generation at the very least. So it's certainly something that's very important to me. I grew up in Southern California, and on our beaches, we had constantly large amounts of tar. You'd walk on the beach, and just at the end of the day, you'd have to go home and use either gasoline or oil to remove tar off the bottom of your foot. And that was because of oil drilling off the shore and leaking. So there had been a massive oil spill down there. And that's one of those things that sticks with you, is that prior to humans drilling for oil, we didn't have large amounts of tar. And, my dogs, fur on their paws didn't get contaminated with tar every time they ran on the beach. And I can only imagine how bad it is for the animals that have to actually live there. And it's hard to sit and say there's nothing I can do about this. So you want to do something, and that's definitely one of the reasons as I build my materials company, that I'm very focused on the full life cycle of the product, because I don't want to make this world worse. I'd like to make it better.
Yeah, well, obviously, thank you for, having that be one of the core values of the company, and hopefully that will carry on for a very long time. I fully agree, of course, but I mean, remembering back when I was a kid, the campaign to be more mindful about even, small things like littering, and you used to see like, take away trash bags, just sort of rolling down the highway in southern Idaho, which I'm really glad to say that, you don't see, masses of trash on the side of the road in the same way anymore. You said fear might be a great motivator for some folks, probably more for the younger folks than the older ones, given that they have an entire life to live on our planet. But that combination of fear and hope, hopefully is pushing everybody, the clean tech challenge, to do good things.
I'm hopeful. I think that it's going to take a lot more effort on everybody's part. And I hope that there's really that the next generation of entrepreneurs, and with a lot of these new technologies, that people are making decisions to, really do something, right? Actually solve problems, as opposed to just feel guilty about them. Raising awareness about issues isn't as helpful as actually coming up with a solution to doing something. And but coming up with a solution is really hard, and it's it's a process. You asked a little bit earlier about how I'd kind of gotten here, and I have to tell you, I really glossed over a lot of projects and ideas and things that I was really excited about until they didn't work. And now I'm really excited about one that I do think is going to work, but I wouldn't call that wasted energy on being excited about things that don't work, because that's just sort of the R&D process. And if your main goal is to build a company that makes money and makes the world a better place, try 10 things, because if one of them works out, that's fantastic. But it may mean that 9 of them don't work out. So, just keep being excited about getting where you're going to go. Because, like I said, I really did gloss over a lot of things that didn't work out.
Yeah, in hindsight, it's always easy to, gloss over the hardships and the things that didn't work out. Although sometimes those are the most interesting stories. I think, it's a bit of a cliche to say that every time you fail, it's a learning experience, but I mean, it's very, very true in the world of entrepreneurship. And for what it's worth, as primarily an observer over several prior clean tech challenges, I think the younger generation that goes through that program is exactly where your heart is, trying over and over again, and certainly with the goal of being a company that not only makes money but produces a positive impact. So one way or another, we're trying to build that future.
Yeah, and it's inspiring. It's really, plastics are really easy and they're really cheap, and as a materials entrepreneur, that's sort of what I focus on is plastics, because that's what so much of our world is made out of these days. Plastics and concrete, and coming up with a cheap, easy, straightforward solution that eliminates that is really going to be a doozy. But I think somebody's going to do it, because we don't really have an option not to in many ways.
Yeah, lack of choice is also a strong motivator in the long run. Well, I want to thank you, Anna, for giving us your time and, of course, your great stories. If you have any closing thoughts, please feel free. And otherwise, we'll wrap up.
My closing thoughts are: learn how to talk to people, particularly if you're a scientist. You've been encouraged for the vast majority of your career to sit in a lab or in a room by yourself and study your equations and your books, and those are not going to be lost. That's extraordinarily important information to have. But if you're going to head into entrepreneurship, you absolutely have to learn how to go have a comfortable face-to-face talk with somebody. And my advice, particularly to young women who struggle with this, and I've struggled with this incredibly in my 20s, is go have a conversation with somebody and see how awkward you can make it. If you just lean into being awkward and how you can just make it more awkward, the next one won't be awkward for whatever reason. So, pick up that skill and lean into it.
I like it. Comfort with the awkward can be a very important thing to be able to do. Well, thank you, Anna. This has been really great. Appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. And of course, we all wish you the best success in this and any of your future product developments.
Thank you, Travis. It was great talking to you.